So Fox News just said the quiet part out loud today, and that the people on the streets of Minneapolis tonight aren't concerned citizens, but instead they are a paid operation. And this journalist here, who apparently still has his integrity, but was live on the scene after yesterday's justified shooting. And yes, folks, we'll talk more about that in just a little bit, because there seems to be a lot of confusion, as to be expected, and as we discussed briefly yesterday, about what is called settled self-defense law, and how, in the context of how law enforcement officers and civilians in many jurisdictions can legally use deadly force. And I'll share with you, at its core, how reasonable perception of an imminent threat of deadly force, and how, in combination with the reliance on fellow officers' perceptions, and not only that, but on top of all that, a 1989 U.S. Supreme Court precedent like Graham v. Connor makes it very clear there's no duty to retreat or for Border Patrol agents to have to wait to be shot. Yeah, so stick around for that. As always, thank you for showing your support by liking my show and subscribing to my channel for more of these truth uncoverings and fraud exposing podcasts. You all really do help out a lot. And be sure to give our friends at Chapter a call at the number you see on your screen for professional level care and free help from advisors that just want to help seniors not get taken advantage of. They are completely unbiased and a team I trust. Click the link in the description to learn more. But speaking of confusion, so here you see supposedly the big bad Minneapolis Antifa general, an individual who goes by the name Kyle Wagner. But Mr. Wagner here, and I'll use the term Mr. loosely, and you'll see why in just a moment. But Wagner made a video calling for people to arm up against federal law enforcement yesterday, and I will play that for you now with, of course, some editing done to stay within the good graces in the realm of compliance here on YouTube in accordance with their community guidelines.
My name is Kyle, I'm Antifa, and there's so much rage in me that I've had to record this like 15 times trying to get the message out. They f***ed up, okay? Go watch my other videos, doesn't matter if you're not here and you're not caught up, you missed the fight. But if you are, it's time to suit up. Boots on the ground, Nicollet and 26th. My house is 4 blocks away. Anywhere between Franklin and Nicollet and 26th and Nicollet, show up, ready to go. Okay, not talking about peaceful protests anymore. We're not talking about having polite conversations anymore. I am talking specifically to my followers. This is everything I have talked about, and this is exactly what I said was going to happen. This is exactly what I said was going to come when we didn't go and march on Whipple with guns. Sorry, but welcome to America 2026, where Second Amendment is the only thing that's going to keep you protected from literal Nazi gunmen that are killing innocent people in the street with impunity. This is not a fucking joke. There's nothing fun to chant about it. Get your fucking guns and stop these fucking people.
And I just want to quote this here where he says, "Get your fucking guns and stop these fucking people." But I guess he didn't get the memo from Tim Walz to turn down the heat, back off the violent rhetoric. Huh.
Well, I spoke twice this morning shortly after I received the call of this shooting. I spoke with the President's Chief of Staff, and first request was to get her people out of there, to get these federal agents out of there. They were going to cause more chaos. And second call is, with no uncertain terms, that we will investigate this. We will not be stonewalled. What we've already seen, and you saw it this morning, before any investigation is done, you have the most powerful people in the federal government spinning stories and putting up pictures, and unrelated people who we don't know anything about, and a picture of a firearm to try and spin a narrative. And I ask Americans, this will end when enough Americans say this will end. Do I have any confidence Donald Trump will do the right thing? No, I don't have a lot of confidence Donald Trump will do the right thing. I do have a lot of confidence that the majority of the American people will do the right thing. And I think there cannot be very many people across this country looking right now, after all the reporting that's been done, after everything that's been said, under the pretense that they are here about immigration reform, and quit referring to these people as law enforcement. They are not law enforcement. We have law enforcement who do an incredible job. And to listen to Greg Bovino denigrate the work of our people who are out there cleaning up their mess, no, I don't have a lot of confidence that he himself will do it, but here's what I do have confidence in. There's a whole lot of Republicans, for whatever reason, cannot find their spine, but they might find the ability to know that they're not going to win another election as long as they live unless they stand up for what's right and stand up for the rule of law and stand up for human decency, and that's the moment.
It's a very simple concept. These men and women are enforcing immigration law enforcement. And so this is just about winning elections, Tim? Funny, coming from a man who forfeit, but only after losing big time as the worst possible VP candidate on any ticket. Ball and chain to one of the dumbest women on the planet. But, oh yeah, that's right. I guess Mr. Antifa didn't get the memo because Tim Walz insists on telling people to not only stop referring to ICE as law enforcement, but he wants to make rioters believe they have no authority and thus should be attacked. And it's clear. He's directly inciting violence, anything to cover for massive fraud. But we'll circle back around for that. And I just have to say something right quick as I try and hold back my own laughter. And allow Tim Walz to investigate this? Oh, you mean like how you've investigated the multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme happening in Minnesota right now? Yeah, I'd trust that investigation about as much as I would trust Renee Good yielding to pedestrians right of way. Is it too soon? Too soon? But the problem is already clear. And that the idea that an image of a semi-automatic pistol is spinning a narrative, you've already lost the plot. And this is a massive problem because it's kind of like a gunshot wound and you can't just put a tampon in it and think it's going to be okay, Tim. Not to mention, as I stated before in yesterday's short but brief quick chat and upload, but as I suspected and now confirmed, the firearm matters. And the media and Tim Walz hate that they can't hide it like they usually do. That is why you never let Dems lead an investigation. But at the Minneapolis Border Patrol shooting, the suspect was armed with a Sig Sauer P320 AXG Combat, a high-capacity 9mm pistol with a threaded barrel, extended 20 to 21 round magazine, and a Sig Romeo optic. A setup costing anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not a cheap carry gun, but more on that in just a moment, because we're going to take a look into the now deceased Tim Walz radical and yet another Minnesota Tim Walz-led radical, and whose parents have stepped up to confess the truth and what we already know. This is Renee Good 2.0, it seems. And as far as I can tell, we're not supposed to get any of that wild and potentially deadly massive storm making its way through the southeast right now, but we did get rain. So I had to relocate before all of my equipment got short-circuited. Hopefully, for any of you, friends or family who may be in the path of the storm, I hope that you are prepared and also are safe. But here, take a look at this and see Tim Walz's law enforcement doing an incredible job here. And they have helped rioters set up a no ICE zone. And you can see here how protesters have declared Minneapolis Autonomous Zone 2.0 at the site of yesterday's shooting. The zone has 2 layers of makeshift walls in both directions. It also appears to be protected by MPD and Tim Walz's National Guard that he's called in. And so you see, the reporter confirms it and mentions comms and says they have radios and a command structure. He also brings up logistics and how they have supply lines and food drops. But no, it doesn't stop there. Lastly, organization. They move like a unit, not a mob.
To you, I say it definitely does feel organized to me, and I think you can tell these people are well connected. They are in communication with each other, and they are giving them instructions. This happened all so quickly. People knew where to go, and they are taking commands. This is an organized movement here. There's communication, there's food, there's notices, there's notifications. They got out here in a hurry, and they outnumber this police force probably by about 10 to 1 at this point.
It's incredible. Let's go back to Garrett Tenney. Garrett.
We know this playbook. The Democrats do this every time. They bust them in, they fund the supplies, they give the orders. This is the NGO industrial complex at work. And so what I'd like to know, Tim, is why are MPD and National Guard assisting in an insurrection and encouraging maximum damage?
At 9:05 a.m. Central Standard Time, as DHS law enforcement officers were conducting a targeted operation in Minneapolis against an illegal alien, Jose Huerta Chuma. You can see this illegal alien on the screen to my left and right. That is Jose Huerta Chuma, whose criminal history includes domestic assault to intentionally inflict bodily harm, disorderly conduct, and driving without a valid license. During this operation, an individual approached U.S. Border Patrol agents with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The agents attempted to disarm the individual, but he violently resisted. Fearing for his life and the lives and safety of fellow officers, a Border Patrol agent fired defensive shots. Medics on the scene immediately delivered medical aid to the subject, but the subject was pronounced dead at the scene. The suspect also had 2 loaded magazines and no accessible ID. This looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. Then, about 200 rioters arrived at the scene and began to obstruct and assault law enforcement. Crowd control measures have been deployed for the safety of the public and law enforcement. This situation is evolving, and more information is forthcoming. The officer was highly trained and had been serving as a Border Patrol agent for 8 years. The officer has extensive training as a range safety officer and less lethal officer.
Or perhaps, maybe a better question is, why did Alex Pretty, I'm not sure. Why did Alex not only bring a firearm to a peaceful protest, but then explain why did he brandish his weapon and disregard direct orders from DHS Border Patrol?
Like that. And by the way, don't let the left kid you with this, that this is just a normal protest where people are peacefully protesting. No, it's not. Peaceful protesters don't have 9mm weapons with 2 extra magazines. Peaceful protesters, I don't know about you, but I'm sure the same as me. I don't go in my closet and I don't have professional grade gas masks ready to go in case tear gas is thrown. A normal neighborhood, what happens in a normal situation is they cooperate, they try to help, or they just stay out of it. This is not normal. This is, again, individuals who are trying to change the fabric of America. And by the way, the last thing...
And by the way, more supplies continue to flow into the no-go zone down in Minneapolis. Free hand warmers, free winter gear, free coffee, free food, free milk. Who's funding all of this? This is not a peaceful protest. It never has been. This is an insurrection. But yeah, to then proceed to pull it on federal agents, the gun, of course, well, that says a lot.
Thank you so much for doing this, and would welcome also any other guidance from Chief Scott. Did the 37-year-old who had a license to carry, did he brandish a gun? And at what point did law enforcement retrieve the gun and also the magazines from him? Can you offer clarity on
this
where
individual
those were found?
Showed up to impede a law enforcement operation and assaulted our officers. They responded according to their training and took action to defend the officer's life and those of the public around him. And I don't know of any peaceful protester that shows up with a gun and ammunition rather than a sign. This is a violent riot when you have someone showing up with weapons and are using them to assault law enforcement officers.
Because video appears to show he's disarmed before shots are fired. So I just want clarity on that. And beyond that, I just want to follow up and ask who within the federal government is leading the criminal investigation, understanding that CBP OPR has opened up an internal investigation. And beyond that, why did federal agents tell Minneapolis Police Department to leave the scene?
We're continuing to follow the exact same protocols that we always have. And so this investigation is ongoing. We're continuing to gather the facts as they unfold throughout that. And we'll do it just like we did under the entire Trump administration and previous administrations. Nothing has changed, and we'll continue to release details as we have them. But I want you to not distract away from the facts of this situation. Our law enforcement officers were there doing a targeted operation against an individual who was in this country illegally and had a criminal conviction for domestic assault with intent to do bodily harm and other convictions as well. This individual went and impeded their law enforcement operations, attacked those officers, had a weapon on him and multiple dozens of rounds of ammunition, wishing to inflict harm on these officers, coming brandishing like that and impeding their work that they were doing. We'll continue to allow. That is a different.
There's no spinning a narrative here, Walls. There's only the truth and suppression of the truth, and I prefer to avoid the latter. As we all know, that is what you pay the media to do constantly. But, yeah. Case in point, a Minnesota Antifa member turned social media influencer and online recruiter named Kyle Wagner is urging his comrades to take up arms to unalive agents of the federal government. Well, agents and independent journalists and conservative America First truth seekers. But his recruitment videos are on Instagram, which you'd think would be a violation of terms of services agreements or something like that. But I guess Zuckerberg hasn't learned, doesn't care, or is too busy getting his ass kicked cosplaying as a Brazilian jiu-jitsu mixed martial arts MMA fighter. But we all know Facebook and Instagram is pretty much, for the most part, they're all just slop anyways. But Wagner has seemingly become popular for the far left in organizing violence due to its reach with mainstream liberals. Wagner has branded himself on the neck with the gang tattoo of the Antifa Iron Front logo, similar to how neo-Nazis brand themselves with fascist symbols. So needless to say, he has a certain look about him, and I bet he would stand out in a crowd, even if it's full of screaming, crying liberals. But before becoming an influencer for Antifa violent extremism, Kyle Edward Wagner had a little bit of a different look to him. The Eden Prairie, Minnesota native was in fact, and maybe still is, on his free time maybe, after he clocks out of his shift and old Soros gives him paid leave. But Kyle is really just another cross-dressing leftist acting tough behind a screen and keyboard. You literally can't make this stuff up. Yeah, folks, he's a cross-dressing activist.
I do this all year, all the time. I'm out and about like this because I do it for me all year. All the time. Yeah. Yep. I'm a blue collar of a dude all day long. And then at least a few times every week, I like to get real clean and pretty and go out, shoot pool or get dinner, maybe go dance. You never know, right? But I don't need a parade to celebrate. I don't need to be groped and harassed and catcalled and treated like a piece of meat by a bunch of cis women who give me side eyes in public when I do this the rest of the year. Who mumble to themselves and have all kinds of things to say behind my back. All of you, off.
I'm Kyle. I'm Antifa.
Gay! But I bet this dude is really just out there trolling for cock. A clout-chasing, 15 minutes of fame-hungry, libtard, rainbow flag narcissist. Just someone suffering from the left's woke push for more mental illness, hoping to get lucky with some other trans Tifa activist. And really, he just wants to gluck his untis, and given the opportunity would beg to get dacked down in an alley somewhere. But you can see it in his eyes. The eyes always tell the real story, much like when you look into the eyes of these two. And you don't even have to look far to see there's no soul behind those blank stares. Lieutenants in Satan's army, waging war on American soil, they are domestic terrorists, the enemy from within. I mean, ICE is in cities nationwide, and shootings are not happening like we have seen in Tim Walz and Jacob Fry's Minneapolis, Minnesota. Even in Memphis, with a Democrat mayor, they are getting cooperation, and none of this is happening. But Tim Walz and Jacob Fry want chaos. So you don't learn about their theft of taxpayers' money. And if you have eyes and a pulse right now, anyone can see how the Minneapolis riots against ICE only started kicking up once the Democratic daycare scams were exposed. Thank you, Nick Shirley.
There's so much fake news out there, and I think people see that and they react to an image instead of really hearing the whole story. And I guess what's kind of baffling to me in all of this, and I would actually just like to point out that the ICE officers were lovely to that little boy. They took him to lunch. They bought him McDonald's. They played his music. I think everyone is doing the best they can. And the reality is that the laws on the books are being enforced. And if you want to have a debate about changing the laws, that's okay. But to attack, for instance, an IRS officer because you don't want to pay your taxes, that's not the way that we do things in this country. Correct. And I would just say it's really baffling to me to watch over the last few years, few decades. I mean, there's clips of Obama attacking Bush for being too lax on deporting people. Obama gave Tom Homan, the current border czar, a medal for deportations. And so all through the last, few decades, we've all agreed that immigration laws need to be enforced. Well, and again, if you want to change those laws, that's another conversation. But the reason that we're having so much chaos is because of the blue cities, because Tim Walz and Jacob Fry will not cooperate with ICE. This isn't happening anywhere else.
So before you say, I just have to say this because this has been settled. Do you think it's a coincidence that deportations are happening all across the country, but it's only in Minnesota where we see this level of chaos? Is it also a coincidence that it's the same state, same leadership that has this massive fraud scandal? Why are we seeing this type of chaos in other cities and states? Okay, what's the common denominator? It's leadership, right? You see Jacob Fry, you see Tim Walz. They keep going out, and what are they telling their base? Go out there, follow ICE, obstruct, record them, use your bodies, use your cars, whatever you need to do, stop them. Jacob Fry said, get the F out, ICE. So why don't they want immigration enforced there? You have to ask these very pertinent, simple questions. Like, why don't they want ICE there? This is even prior to the situation with Renee Good, right? See, they know that the chaos is going to ensue anytime you direct citizens to go and obstruct federal law enforcement, which, by the way, they're also saying that they're not actually law enforcement. That's another lie they're telling their base, to embolden them to go against these regular guys who aren't, quote unquote, federal agents, right? Is to cause confusion and embolden, give their base a sense of entitlement. They think they're doing something righteous. And so they go out, they create all this chaos. And then, of course, with this level of chaos, something's going to go wrong, as it did today. And guess what? What are they going to say? See, look, and now Jacob Fry and Tim Walz have instantly gone to their social media to say, okay, President Trump, you see what's happening? We need you to get rid of ICE. We need you to stop the operations and pull out. That's the goal. That's what they wanted all along. Why? Because they don't want ICE deporting their new voter base. They need them. You know why they need them? Take a guess. Why is Jacob Fry dancing around waving a Somali flag and speaking in Somalian, and Minnesota officials are wearing hijabs even though they're Catholic? Why? None of this is coincidence. They need to keep the illegals here. And so they have rallied their base for their own political game. And they're hoping that it'll turn the public so far against ICE that they'll get what they want, which is to have ICE removed so that they can allow the criminality to continue, because allegedly they're implicated and included in that. That's the real tea.
A lot of news every day now about the immigration situation there. We know Governor Walz and Mayor Fry in Minneapolis won't cooperate with immigration. This has all sort of overshadowed something you're looking into, which is the Somali fraud scandal that was exploding before the ICE story hit. What's going on with the Somali fraud investigation? You've had one key hearing. What do we expect next on that front?
Well, we just keep digging and understand that the Justice Department's up there, and they've already, I think, indicted like 50-some, 60-some people. Some people have already been convicted, like the folks who ran this Feeding Our Future program where they were supposed to be taking taxpayer dollars and actually giving meals to children. They found out there were no kids and there were no meals. They were just stuffing the money in their pocket. And it looks like that the government officials in the state government, the Attorney General, the governor, and others, weren't just kind of looking the other way, but actually almost assisting with this. When you look at particularly the Attorney General, he had meetings with the leaders of this group. A few weeks after the meetings, they're getting his campaign getting campaign contributions.
And a Fox News alert also in Minnesota, the convicted ringleader of one of the state's biggest fraud schemes is speaking to Fox News from behind bars. Now, she believes that the scam was no surprise to local Democratic leaders, and she's naming names. She spoke to Alexis McAdams. Hi, Alexis.
Hey, Dana. Yeah, so everywhere you look in the state of Minnesota, right, there seems to be another fraud scam. So this one involves Amy Bach. She's a Minnesota woman convicted of fraud for taking taxpayer money that was meant to feed hungry kids. But listen to this. Bach tells me the real issue here is the state of Minnesota, which she says kept giving scammers your taxpayer money even after they were flagged as fraudsters.
I have to believe that the governor's office and Keith Ellison's office were aware of this. They've said they were involved in helping the FBI. They've said they were made aware. But apparently I'm scary, so they couldn't do anything.
So Bach ran this nonprofit called Feeding Our Future. You might have heard of it. It was one of dozens convicted in this $250 million scam. You can see her mugshot there. Prosecutors say this group set up sham restaurants. They pretended they were making these meals. They got paid by the state for those meals, but they just pocketed the cash. Bach, who's looking at 30 years behind bars, tells me the state signed off on those businesses, not her.
It all went through a process. They were all approved. They were all paid by the state, yet all the fingers are being pointed at me.
And it's not just Bach. Whistleblowers told a congressional committee Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison there ignored warnings for years as millions of dollars and millions were stolen on their watch. Congress is investigating a long list of massive fraud schemes in the state. It's hard to keep up. Prosecutors say it's led to at least $9 billion in fraud, Dana, and counting. Congress also asking why the Attorney General there would meet with a group of Somali fraudsters, which were under FBI investigation in 2021. The group can be heard in an audio clip given to us by Bach's lawyer offering to donate to his campaign if he can help them get their funding flowing again. Ellison denies any wrongdoing here. He slammed Bach in a statement to Fox, calling her a liar and manipulator, adding now she's on a media tour to deflect her guilt onto others instead of finally taking responsibility for this fraud scheme that she ran. So we reached out to Governor Walz too, Dana. He didn't get back to us. House Republicans say it's just getting started. They want to subpoena Walz and Ellison because they say they're responsible for ripping off American taxpayers.
So we're digging into all this, and I appreciate the fact that the Justice Department, federal Justice Department here, and has named a specific person, designated them as the person to examine fraud, both what's going on in Minnesota, but around the country. Is these kind of games being played elsewhere?
One last question. We have about 30 seconds. Are you troubled by these reports that you have these left-wing nonprofits and activist groups funding training for these political vigilantes to go and confront ICE agents? Are we going to see an investigation of where the money is coming from to fund all this radicalism in Minneapolis?
Yeah, we're looking at all this. You think about what happened last Sunday. You got 5 rights under the First Amendment, and the very first one is your right to practice your faith, your freedom of religion, and yet they were in there. These activists were disrupting that, and what they're doing to ICE agents. I mean, they're getting doxxed, they're getting tracked, they're getting spit on, they're getting attacked and harassed while they're trying to enforce the law. One guy got hit with shovels and broomsticks, for goodness sake. So, I think it's important to look who's providing the resources and who's doing the training for these left-wing activists, and that's being kind using that term.
Being very kind there, as you heard Congressman Jim Jordan. And this image here came across my feed last night, just as my family and I were sitting down to eat dinner. And it's disgusting. But it shows the aftermath and physical pain after a leftist just bit an ICE officer's finger off. I'm not kidding you all, folks, but the media, Governor Walz, they all say this is mostly peaceful. Tell me, what's peaceful about sending your own people to trigger their own death by suicide by cop? Imagine being so ignorant that you protest against safer streets and cities. Imagine hating Trump so much you throw your life away protesting that Trump is enforcing the same immigration laws Obama implemented. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have sadly witnessed far too often here recently, but being brainwashed has consequences.
So this is the gun at the scene, the shooter's gun. And I'm familiar with this gun. This is a SIG 320. Gosh, what do they call it? The AXG, I think. Yeah, AXG. The SIG 320 AXG Combat. You can see it has a threaded barrel, just like the suspect's gun. This image is from the SIG website, so it doesn't have the optional optic on it, which this guy has, which, by the way, is a SIG optic, a Romeo 2 optic, 9mm pistol, high capacity. This magazine might be the 20 or 21 round magazine, the way it's extending from the gun. This is not an inexpensive firearm. This gun, just the gun without the optic, sells for anywhere between $1,000 and $1,200 retail. And the optic that's on the shooter's gun is typically another $500 or $600. So we're pushing a couple $1,000s worth of the pistol here, which is not a small amount of money on the gun. Now, I'm going to mention, because someone's going to mention it, like it or not, SIG 320s have developed a reputation, deserved or not, of unintentional discharges, meaning if they're dropped, sometimes they go off when they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be drop safe, but there's been lots of press coverage and lawsuits about people like just putting a primer in the gun and dropping it, the primer goes off. That's not supposed to happen. There's been lots of lawsuits where people say, I bumped the gun in the holster and it just went off and shot me in the leg, that kind of stuff. In this case, it's beginning to look, at least initially, as if one of the ICE guys perceived the gun on the suspect, this gun, and took it off his person and was turning away, walking away with the gun to secure it from the suspect. But what might have happened, remember, there's a whole bunch of officers involved. They're not all, Ethernet cable to each other's brains. They're all seeing different things. And one officer might have seen the gun and said the word gun. And that might have triggered that first shot by an officer. And then all the other officers begin shooting in response to that initial discharge. That does not make the shooting unlawful. It would be an awful, but lawful shooting. So,
and this comment here may just win the day. As Gilbert Cavalier says, you know who didn't get shot by ICE today? Me. Because I'm not out there trying to undermine their operations or de-arrest rapists and murderers. No sympathy for these a-holes. I'm tired of this. But it is absolutely mind-boggling that anyone would protest to keep rapists, child predators, murderers, gang members in their communities. But maybe they're just doing it for the money, taking shifts as exhausted white liberal women clock in for another long day protecting migrant sex offenders. That'd be the tragedy, really, and being stuck, shacking up, tied to the old ball and chain, but it being a blue-haired liberal Subaru owner. Maybe Pretty just had enough and wanted to end it all and get away from her or him. Kind of hard to tell these liberal women apart anymore nowadays. But Gedra says, it wasn't tragic. People need to stop using the word tragic when they mean sad, especially when it isn't sad either. This was retarded. A retard being put down for his retarded behavior that produced 100% predictable results. And Nebdoc's comment here ought to be a nationally broadcast public service announcement, and how having a gun is not the same as being a responsible gun owner. And as a responsible gun owner, you know what I don't do? Pull my gun on law enforcement. I also don't get into a wrestling match with them. If I get pulled over, I openly disclose my gun, and if they want to disarm me, I comply. It's not that damn hard. The gun isn't the problem. It's the dumbass holding it, for which you'd think Tim Walz would have condemned Alex Pretty for having a gun anyway, right?
June 14th, they've been saying it since that horrific day at Annunciation. They continue to say it. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. And I've traveled across the state. These folks have traveled across the states. I've said in town halls, the deep sense of frustration, the deep sense of anger, the deep sense of grief and loss around gun violence. And to watch people stand and deflect and word salad about everything of this, there's too damn many guns and the wrong types of guns on the street. And I don't want to hear, how do you define assault weapon? I damn sure can assign what it is and describe what it is and tell you what it does. And unfortunately, we have a whole bunch of parents now who know a lot more about what these weapons were meant to do.
But no, just more political theater and selective outrage. But have a look at this. Landier is across the pond over in England, and he's taken the liberty and slowed this down. And this is very important here, folks. And so you see, and forgive me if I butchered his name here. And so you see in the huddle, one or more ICE officers shout gun. This caused another officer to draw his sidearm. Another officer removed the man's sidearm and then walked away, but it was discharged negligently. See for yourself. The SIG P320 is notorious for NDing or negligently discharging, but typically only when dropped. That then triggered the other agents to think that the man on the ground, Alex Pretty, had begun shooting as they neutralized the perceived threat. Now, if this is what happened, it's an incredibly unfortunate accident in Minneapolis, but that doesn't fully explain what really happened yesterday. And thanks for this info, Landier. But isn't just the fact of the man marching toward the ICE officers, appearing to be pointing the gun at them, a reasonable perception itself? I mean, also, the guy had other rounds of ammunition. Who knows? He might have even had a second firearm.
You just made claims that the individual posed a threat to law enforcement.
That is no claim. It is the facts. The facts of the situation. This individual showed up to a law enforcement operation with a weapon and dozens of rounds of ammunition. He wasn't there to peacefully protest. He was there to perpetuate violence. And he was asked to show up and to continue to resist by a governor who's irresponsible and has a long history of corruption and lying. And we won't stand for it anymore. These law enforcement officers take an oath. They get up every single day and they go out to protect the public. Many of these individuals live in their communities. And this mayor and this governor have doxed them. They have allowed people to threaten them and their families and expose their identities in order to instill fear and violence. And that's not what America is about.
This is no claim. These are the facts. Officers were in a physical struggle with an armed suspect when a gun was perceived and the word gun was shouted. Under settled self-defense law, officers are entitled to rely on fellow officers' reasonable perceptions. They do not have to personally confirm the threat. Once a firearm appears during active resistance, the legal standard is simple: reasonable perception of imminent deadly force. That standard was met here. Freeze frame activism doesn't override real-time dynamics, and the law does not require officers to wait to be shot.
Greater issue is, even if there is an investigation that ultimately proves that at the time of the shooting it was legally justified, I don't think that even matters at this point, because there is so much outrage and concern around what is happening in the city.
I will allow you to call this tragic, sure, but more importantly, lawful use of force, and maybe even most importantly, completely avoidable. But you're gonna learn today. You are now entering the find out zone.
What's required for the shooting to be lawful? The officers have to have a reasonable perception of an imminent threat of unlawful deadly force harm. That's it. If the answer to that is yes, this is a lawful shoot. They're struggling with this gun. If they perceive this guy as being non-compliant with arrest, fighting with officers, as reaching for a weapon, they will have reasonably perceived an imminent threat of unlawful deadly force harm, justifying their use of deadly defensive force. And their perception does not have to be correct. Their perception has to be reasonable. We're not required to make perfect decisions in self-defense. Police, too. We're required to make reasonable decisions in self-defense. If an officer heard a fellow officer shout gun, and officers are allowed to rely on the expertise of training on their fellow officers, they don't personally need to see the threat themselves. If another officer with whom they're working in that event shouts out that the triggering event has been observed by a fellow officer, that's enough for another officer to resort to the use of deadly defensive force. They're allowed to rely on their reasonable perceptions of the other officer's communications and conduct. Happens all the time because everyone knows the officers have different perspectives or seeing different things at any given time. Every officer does not personally need to see the threat. He has to have a reasonable belief that the threat is present. That can be based on a reliance of what other officers communicate to him. So if one officer shouts gun, all the other officers are going to be prepared to, and some of them will shoot, as appears to be what happened here. When you get in a physical brawl with a bunch of armed law enforcement officers and you have a gun on your person, you're running a serious risk of getting fatally shot in the course of that confrontation. The moment they see that gun, they've reasonably perceived an imminent threat of deadly, unlawful force against them, and they'll justifiably respond with deadly defensive force. By the way, it's not uncommon for police officers to shoot other police officers. Like two plainclothes police officers respond to a scene of violence, see each other with guns in hand, and one shoots the other. And it's a justified shooting because the shooter, although he wasn't actually shooting a criminal and that other person was a fellow police officer unknown to him, was not actually a deadly force threat to him. He was reasonably perceived, given the circumstances, as an imminent, unlawful threat of deadly force harm, and therefore it was justified to use deadly defensive force.
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. But ladies and gentlemen, here we have the breaking news bombshell of the day, nipping the leftist mainstream media's narrative and Tim Walz and Jacob Frye's rhetoric in the bud.
Just saw a video of more than 6 masked agents pummeling one of our constituents and shooting him to death. How many more residents, how many more Americans need to die or get badly hurt for this operation to end? How many more lives need to be lost before this administration realizes that a political and partisan narrative is not as important as American values? How many times must local and national leaders must plead with you, Donald Trump, to end this operation and recognize that this is not creating safety in our city?
So the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frye, says he watched a video of 6 masked agents pummeling a man. But what he fails to mention is that that man had a gun. What he fails to mention is the family of Alex Pretty, I really don't know what his name is, released a powerful statement about his actions and behavior. Dangerous follower mentality that they knew would wind up getting him killed thanks to Tim Walz and Jacob Frye, all in the name of illegals, political violence, and protecting criminals and fraudsters. Alex Pretty's parents begged him not to engage with federal officers, but he was insistent. Now classified a domestic terrorist, Pretty brought a military-style pistol with optics and around 30 to 51 rounds. He came expecting a firefight at distance. If he were merely carrying for self-protection, he wouldn't have had that many rounds on him. And it's clear he was prepared to kill as many officers as possible. He didn't bring his permit nor his ID. And let me just point out and highlight, it's illegal to carry in Minnesota without both. Alex Pretty's parents told him not to engage with federal officers while attending protests in Minnesota. And I quote, "We had this discussion with him 2 weeks ago or so, that go ahead and protest, but do not engage. Do not do anything stupid," basically. And that's what Alex's father, Michael Pretty, told CBS News. And he said he knows that. He knew that.
an ICE officer had pushed violently a woman to the ground, and he had come over to help get her up. And that is what precipitated this incident that very quickly led to an execution, a deadly shooting in the street. What we are seeing here is a momentous, pivotal moment for the United States. And I cannot underscore enough how precipitous this moment is. ICE and CBP, what we're seeing here, we will see which agencies were responsible. But at the end of the day, under this so-called excuse of border security, where Minneapolis is over 300 miles from the United States border, we have an unleashing of federal agents and violence exerting a tremendous amount of violence and lost life against the American people, who are well within their First Amendment rights, and in this case, it seems as though well within their Second Amendment rights. As you mentioned earlier, in this video, you do not see immediate evidence of anyone reaching for a firearm.
Now tell me, how would the bartender even know? Was she there? She's no better than Tim Walz at this moment, but not that I would expect her to be either. She's reading a script like usual, pandering to the base and hoping to win favoritism in the party and get votes. But I just can't stand how she continues to go out and try and tell me what I saw. But the worst part about it is she's telling the blind, deaf, dumb libs out there, subscribe to CNN, who eat this shit up, never question anything, and repeat as gospel to any and all who will listen to their BS. Oh, and our Second Amendment rights do not grant us the immunity to attack federal law enforcement agents. But for just a moment, allow me to address the elephant in the room. And Minneapolis, Minnesota is indeed hundreds of miles from the southern U.S.-Mexico border, roughly 1,200 to 1,500 miles, depending on the exact point, which is likely what AOC was emphasizing in her comments about the ICE incident feeling distant from typical border enforcement zones. However, Minnesota directly borders Canada to the north, and the U.S.-Canada border is very real and active for immigration enforcement too. The northern edge of Minnesota touches the Canadian border, provinces like Ontario and Manitoba, and from Minneapolis, the closest points along the Minnesota-Canada border are about 250 to 300 miles north. For example, near International Falls or Baudette, I'm probably mispronouncing it. Driving, however, to a border crossing like Pigeon River near Grand Portage or War Road is around 300 to 400 miles, and larger crossings like those near Winnipeg, Manitoba are roughly 450 to 500 miles driving from Minneapolis. But this puts Minneapolis well outside the typical 100-mile border zone for certain federal immigration checkpoints, but it's still much closer to an international border than many realize, and far closer than to Mexico. And yes, illegal crossings happened on the northern border, U.S.-Canada border, during the Biden administration, though at much lower volumes than the southern border. U.S. Customs and Border Protection CBP data shows that northern border apprehensions encounters rose notably in some years, with reports indicating hundreds of thousands cumulatively across 2022 to 2025. Example being one analysis cited roughly 755,000 illegal crosser apprehensions in northern border states over 4 years. States like Washington, New York, Vermont, Michigan, and others saw the bulk, but activity occurred across the entire northern frontier, including near Minnesota. Drug smuggling, including increased significantly along the northern border under Biden, with some reports noting hundreds of % spikes in certain categories. Now, while southern border numbers dominated headlines, millions annually at peak, the northern border wasn't zero, and encounters included gotaways, asylum seekers, and inadmissible migrants from various countries, yes, including Somalia. But just so you know, Minnesota has one of the largest Somali American communities in the U.S., especially in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Many having arrived legally via refugee resettlement or family ties over decades. However, undocumented crossings and overstays occur everywhere, including via the northern border. For instance, and for argument's sake, and based on patterns seen in prior years, migrants from Somalia or other African Horn of Africa countries have used Canada as an entry point. Some fly into Canada legally, visa-free or otherwise, and then attempt to cross south into the U.S. irregularly to seek asylum or join communities. Reverse flows happen too. For example, some Somalis rejected for U.S. asylum crossed north into Canada illegally. Plus, with large established Somali populations in Minnesota, any future undocumented arrivals, like via northern crossings, visa overstays, or other means, could aim for the Twin Cities area for family, community support, mosques, jobs, or and fraud. And recent enforcement actions, obviously after Biden defected, targeted some undocumented Somalis in Minnesota and Maine, showing ongoing presence and removals. And we won't get into it here in today's show, but we really do need to talk about Maine in the next.
It's the same thing that we're finding in Minnesota, just to be completely blunt, Elizabeth, the same tactics being used to defraud Medicaid. In this case, zombie offices, I call them, where large clusters of home health care businesses and providers in one location. We saw them in Minnesota, and we're seeing them here, and the business owners and building owners that we speak to here say enough. We're here in Portland, Maine. We found of the businesses that are registered in here, of the 20-something businesses, 10 of them are home healthcare businesses. As you can see, Prestige Home Care, Bright Star Home Care, Atlantic Community Support, 5 Stars Home Health Care, Prime Home Care, LLC. It's a trend we saw in Minnesota, one that the Minnesota House Oversight Committee on Fraud tells News Nation is a giant red flag. Large clusters of healthcare providers in one location. This building right behind me has 22 different home and community-based healthcare companies registered in the building. Inside this Portland office building, owner Ron Nevins agreed to speak with us.
I think I got 10 healthcare companies, which is probably about half, maybe a little less than half of this building.
Healthcare, home healthcare. I didn't even know what home healthcare was. Do you think these businesses are actually legit businesses?
Some, yes, but some I highly question.
But we won't just jump to conclusions. We will do our research as always and report on the facts. And in short, as it relates to Sandy Cortez, the fact is borders exist on all sides, not just the South. The northern one is quieter but not imaginary, and enforcement, crossings, and community ties like Somali Minnesotans make it extremely relevant to not only the conversation, but federal immigration law enforcement. But we all know what the DSA firebrand is trying to do. Ilhan Omar
reported having a negative net worth in 2019. Back in 2019, her household income, her household net worth has gone up from $0 to $30 million, and the value of her husband's company, Roselake Capital, has gone from some small amount of money up to $25 million. So apparently, it really does pay to get into politics.
Well, I don't know what she's doing, but I suspect that it's not legal. Who knows? You don't see that kind of change. I mean, she reported on her disclosures around here about a $65,000 net worth just a couple of years back. And now, like you point out, Charlie, she's reporting it's $30 million. Look, Ilhan Omar is a hateful, racist anti-Semite who goes on national TV and plays the victim and goes to the University of Minnesota campus and essentially encourages violence on Jewish students. This needs to be investigated. She was right at the center of the Somali fraudster operation called Feeding Our Future, the $250 million fraud case, largest pandemic fraud case in the country. Those are her people, and they're the ones that donated to her campaign. Right. So
don't be distracted. They stole $19 billion. this meme says, and the events that went down yesterday wouldn't have happened if he had stayed home. His survivors should publicly thank the governor, AG, and reps for the violence to distract from their theft. It's called useful idiots for a reason. And despite possibly all of Alex Petit's personal, educational, or professional accomplishments, in the end, he died a useful idiot.
Hey, yo, America, understand this. I'm a black man in America, right? I walk around with a 19 on my hip, a SIG in my glove compartment, and an AR-15 in my 2020 Honda Accord daily, right? And you know what I don't do with those things? I don't go and impede law enforcement carrying out their duties. You know what I do? I mind my business. That's all I do. I go out there, I drink water, I get money, and I mind my business. You know my favorite saying, right? And for some reason, I'm able to survive. Every single day, I'm able to come home, run my kids a bath, tuck them in, and continue to do my thing. No harm comes to me, no harm comes to my family. I also have a 12-gauge pump, away from the kids, of course, because, you know, you got to be a responsible pew-pew owner, okay? And no harm comes to me and my family because I mind my business. I let the law do the law things. If I have beef, I petition my lawmakers. I don't go and take it out on law enforcement who are also citizens and Americans like me. And for some reason, I'm still here. There's a lesson in that.
And the lesson is we are not the same. The left always chooses violence and then cries about accountability when accountability meets them with equal and opposite force. Now, check this out. And James O'Keefe, guerrilla journalist and founder of Project Veritas, shares a chilling but urgent update that he posted to X just hours ago, or after yesterday's shooting, rather, that says, "I've never experienced anything quite like today in my life."
This is James O'Keefe in downtown Minneapolis. We have a team of undercover reporters still inside the mob. I was at the scene of the shooting covering it this morning, and basically we barely got out of there alive. There were a few hundred that surrounded us, started throwing ice bottles at us. A few hit us, hit our vehicle. They were starting to rip off my bulletproof vest, so we got out of there. We were followed, we were tailed, and here we are right now. We just got this message, and it says, we know that you're in Minneapolis. You're with O'Keefe and his crew of Nazis. You're in a white Ford license plate. They actually wrote the license plate down from Florida. You have 1 hour to leave or you're dead. You have 1 hour to leave or you're dead.
He said he's interacted with the cartel and witnessed some crazy things in the desert in 24. But what strikes him is how organized these agitators in Minneapolis are. They have spotters everywhere in the city and suburbs and on street corners, even 30 minutes away from downtown. They have people at hotels that work with them and signal to them, which made it difficult for them to lose their tail once their cover was blown. Usually, he can lose a tail, but not this time. O'Keefe said, "We switched locations 3 times. I recorded and posted this while leaving Wayzata while they were still surveilling. We all agreed we must make the threats public ASAP, even if we had people still in the field with the hidden cams." And earlier around noon, while at Cam Higbee released his report on the signal threads, he was inside what appeared to be a fully autonomous zone. No police presence. The police were told to leave. He identified himself as Press, and they said they will kill Press. and will not let him leave. He said, my skin was fully covered because it was so cold, but because they couldn't verify who I was, they screamed and started throwing ice bottles at us. One hit a Marine who was with me, and they patted him down like they were the authorities, attempting to confiscate any weapons. They were set to destroy our vehicle before we even got to it, but says he will have a full video report shortly. But the bigger picture here is more important. And he says he's angry, but not at the agitators. And he finds himself already angry at the people who don't understand what we're dealing with and will do nothing about it.
We are going to produce our footage, gathering everything we've got from this weekend. We're going to put our report together along with the hidden camera footage that we have. We still have undercover people in the field. Please pray for my team's safety. This is worse than anything I could have possibly imagined. I have security with me, former Marine, and he said that it was worse than overseas, and it was certainly anything worse than I've seen the cartel at the border. We're going to contact law enforcement, DHS, and the FBI, and we're going to try to get out of here safely so we can bring the news to you. Stay tuned for our report coming Tuesday, 1 o'clock.
Finally, when he got to the suburbs, he said it felt like he was in a simulation. He believes the American people need to wake up. This moment is a warning about where we're headed. Fear pushes people to care only about their money and their families. And he says, I get it. But when fear turns inward, when self-preservation and greed replaces moral courage, evil goes unchallenged. And it's funny how there's 0 Somalians rioting in Minneapolis right now. But history shows that what we ignore today will come for us all tomorrow. Ironically and incredibly, I see that these communists do not fear death in the same way most good people seem to. The only thing the communists fear is exposure itself.
It matters that the mayor stands by, and so I assume stands with, someone who says things like, if you don't believe in the government's sacred right to seize private property, it's over. Seize private property. Home ownership is racist. Elect more communists. Private property, especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy. Really? Even among the 20 million black Americans who own their own home? I mean, these are the kind of utterances I might forgive as something a dumb white girl said while she was at Bryn Mawr. Because it's the kind of privilege hating you can only learn for $95,000 a year. But these are statements made as an adult. Yes, for co-eds from elite private colleges, you're only a lesbian until graduation, but the communism lasts a lifetime. Democrats seem to be having this debate whether or not Mayor Mamdani is a socialist or a democratic socialist. Let me settle it. He's a straight-up communist. How do I know this? Well, I'm reading between the lines when one of his major advisors says, elect more communists, which is fine. It's fine. It's a belief system. He's allowed to believe it, and people are allowed to vote for it. But if liberals deny it, like he's just going through a goth phase, they're going to lose more elections. This is not a communist country. And this is the pendulum never lands in the middle problem I'm always bitching about. Really, the choices we get here are either the worst version of crony capitalism or communism, either a side deal for the Trump family every time he does business overseas, or the lady who says, impoverish the white middle class. Oh yeah, there's a great campaign slogan for you. Honestly, as New York mayoral races go, I was less creeped out by Anthony Weiner's dick.
But that's New York City, in addition to Seattle, Washington, along with some other blue democratic socialists or, communist cities. And much like Maine and their fraud scam, we will have to come back to that in a future podcast.
Well, why this has happened in Minneapolis is because you have a mayor, you have a governor who has declared Minneapolis a sanctuary city, saying, bring your worst of the worst to Minneapolis. You're invited here. We will protect you.
The real tragedy here is what Governor Walz and Mayor Frey and Minnesota Democrats and the mainstream media is trying to get away with, cover up and pull the wool over the eyes of Americans with this now deadly grift. But I don't want to start a Pam Bondi bashing session. However, I must share this. And in response to the latest events unfolding, and if you look through the smoke burning from the trash can fires lit in the streets of Tim Walz's Winter of Love and George Floyd 2.0 disaster, you will uncover reason, perhaps. And Pam Bondi sent Minnesota officials a letter yesterday saying ICE would leave the state if Minnesota turns over its voter files to the Trump administration. And of course, the left is saying how they're openly using state violence as a bargaining chip to seize election infrastructure. But this post and the statements made here by this so-called Democratic strategist, but more like propagandist, Matt McDermott, wants to rally the septum-pierced troops by planting the seed of false and disinformation with an idea of an open extortion-like tactic, as he frames this as the Trump administration weaponizing federal immigration enforcement or state violence to gain control over election-related data and infrastructure in a key swing state.
By now you've seen this horrific video. Another individual killed in Minnesota. It's just fucking awful, the inhumanity of this. We cannot fund ICE as it is constituted today. But we found out something else really important today. Pam Bondi sent a letter to state officials in Minnesota in which she made a list of demands for ICE to leave Minneapolis. And one of those demands was that the state turn over its voter rolls to the federal government. This has never been about public safety. Minneapolis is a much less safe place today because ICE is there. This is likely about trying to rig and steal the election. Donald Trump is wildly unpopular. He is not committed to democracy. And he knows the only way that his movement is to retain power, the only way that his corporate allies retain power, his billionaire allies retain power this November, is for Trump to steal the election. And so he's saying to Minneapolis, if you don't give me control of the voter rolls, then ICE isn't leaving. And you can see that if he gets away with it in Minnesota, he's likely going to try it in places like Philadelphia and Phoenix, other key cities in swing states. So understand why it's so important for us to draw a line. I have been arguing all weekend that the Senate should not pass funding for the Department of Homeland Security. First and foremost, because this is a rogue agency that is operating outside of the law and is killing American citizens. But also because the underlying game here may be to steal the 2026 election. And no senator, but in particular no Democratic senator, should play a part in that.
It's comical to hear Democrats talking about stealing elections.
Thank you, Phil. During the run-up to and on Election Day, I was working as a temporary hire at United Mailing Services, UMS, a USPS subcontractor in Wisconsin. I began employment on August 26, 2020 as a route driver and box truck driver. This meant my job was to pick up mail on a predetermined route and deliver it to UMS for sorting and metering. I would then take the sorted mail in my box truck to USPS. In September or October, I began to deliver mail-in ballots from UMS to USPS as part of my evening delivery duties. I knew this because there was special bins marked for ballots only. On one occasion, I forgot to retrieve the ballots for transportation and had to go back for them. After that, I always made sure to check that I had the ballot bins loaded for transport. On November 2nd, 2020, I noticed that there was only one ballot in the bin for delivery to USPS. And on November 3rd, Election Day, there were no ballots in the bin for delivery. One can imagine my surprise then when the next day, November 4th, I was asked by a senior USPS employee named Monte if I had forgotten any ballots the night before. Monte explained that an order came down from the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of USPS that 100,000 ballots were missing. Monte then told me that his post office had dispatched employees to look for the missing ballots around 4 a.m., and that only 7 or 8 were found at UMS. Based on my previous experience and habit of double-checking for ballots, I believe that to be a lie. The following day, November 5th, 2020, I had a conversation with a different USPS employee named Rachel, in which she admitted that USPS employees were ordered to backdate ballots that were received too late to be lawfully counted. I asked Rachel if I would get in trouble with my boss for those ballots the other night, referring to the allegedly missing ballots I discussed with USPS employee Monte on November 4th, 2020. No, you wouldn't, she responded, as long as they were postmarked for the 3rd. She continued, that's why they had us do that. I didn't bring any of this to the attention of my supervisors at USPS at the time due to what I perceived to be their hostility towards President Donald Trump and their evident contempt for the law. I heard those same 2 post office employees making jokes about taking mail-in ballots for Trump and throwing them away. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a Biden supporter either. In fact, I didn't vote for either of the main candidates. But something profoundly wrong occurred in Wisconsin during the presidential election, and the American people have a right to know about it. Thank you.
Democrats, just like Senator Chris Murphy, love to talk about how wildly unpopular Donald Trump is, but still have to manufacture even more lies, cheat, steal, and attempt to assassinate more than once just to try and convince people that it's even remotely true. I mean, when we all know that it's the Democrats who actually don't like the Democrats.
Take a look at how Democrats who disapprove of congressional Democratic leaders. Hello, we're talking about 57% in January of 2026, the second highest disapproval rate for Democratic leaders from their own party on record. It's only beat by what we saw earlier on in this Congress when it was 61%. There's basically been no improvement. Democrats hate their own congressional leaders. These numbers are awful, awful, awful.
This is awful, awful, awful. But they still vote Democrat because it's a cult, or really just an illegal ring. But I digress. And let me just make one thing clear. Deporting illegal aliens who fill up Democrat voter rolls isn't state violence. Furthermore, Pam Bondi's letter doesn't say anything about ICE leaving Minnesota. In fact, ICE is not under her purview, as it is one of the agencies in DHS, which is under the leadership of the Secretary of Homeland Security. And I thought the original poster, the Democratic strategist, was really just stupid. But then I checked out his profile and it actually lists him as a political operative for Democrats. So there's that. And I'm not sure how you can legitimately consider yourself to be a strategist when you're actually illiterate. And the letter from AG, Attorney General Pam Bondi, to Governor Walz, dated January 24, 2026, demands access to Minnesota voter rolls to verify federal law compliance, along with repealing sanctuary policies and sharing welfare data. It urges cooperation with ICE, but does not state ICE will leave if voter files are provided. It's framed as restoring law and order amid ongoing enforcement. Check the sources if you'd like. Fox News PDF, Democracy Docket. And I'll drop that down in the description if you want to go check it out. But do you want to see wildly unpopular? Then have a look at this election coverage map from 1984. Notice all the red states. And now listen to this from Governor Tim Walz's retarded daughter.
I have gotten a lot of people asking why I think Trump is targeting Minnesota. And one of the big reasons is because Minnesota's never wrong. We are the only state that never voted for Ronald Reagan. And that is something that I think many Minnesotans, including me, are proud of. If you know me, you know that I have major beef with Ronald Reagan. He is like the root, well, nothing's ever the root. The root is like all of the things long hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But a lot of the issues we see today started with that man, and Minnesota never voted for him. And we are the only state that never voted for him. And I think many of us would stand by that. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see Trump targeting Minnesota. We're never wrong. We are always on the right side of history, and we're going to stand up for our people and our place and our wonderful state and the wonderful communities within our state, and we're not going to back down. And history is going to look kindly upon the state of Minnesota for that. So yeah, that's one of the reasons Minnesota's never wrong.
She's fully embodying the childless cat lady aura of the liberal woman, and apparently is never wrong. But would be willing to bet with daddy taking a dive, possibly serving time and going to prison, and no more political power or brass and being cut out of the tax money stealing fraud scheme. Hope will have to come up with other ways to support herself. So I'd say expect an OnlyFans soon. I mean, she is a bit of a narcissist, but it had better be soon before, again, she becomes another one of those unrecognizable statistics of the women the left somehow has found the precise recipe to mass produce. But so you see, Ronald Reagan, the 40th president of the United States, died on June 5th, 2004, at the ripe old age of 93. And what I would just like to know is, how in the world can you have a beef with a man you've never even met, let alone if you had, you would have only been about 2 or 3 years old at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, that is pure mind rot and brainwashing. She and all the other libs can't help it. And they all end up incriminating themselves and saying the quiet part out loud. Somebody should really take her social media privileges away before she fucks up bad and says something she will ultimately regret for the rest of her miserable life. But I'm just going to read Johnny Johnson's posted comment here under Hope's video that says, "Congratulations, Governor Walz. You raised a stupid twat. Hating on the president that ended the USSR, East Germany, and the Cold War. Wow. Batshit crazy seems to run in the family. But Minnesota doesn't vote for Republicans, you say? And that horse has been beaten to death. But like I said, the Dems always manage to make the same mistake, not just twice, but more times than I can even count or keep count now at this point. And if there's one thing the Dems are good at, it's putting America last. Oh, and lighting themselves on fire. Oh, and so there's that incrimination thing I was talking about again. Yeah. And so you see, in the anti-ICE, anti-America, liberal, DSA, communist wing of the DNC and Democrat Party, in all of their infinite wisdom, have now gone viral. But having unknowingly implicated themselves in even more crimes as they exposed themselves after having the Minneapolis Signal chat infiltrated by Cam Higbee, who says, "I have infiltrated organizational signal groups all around Minneapolis with the sole intention of tracking down federal agents and impeding, assaulting, and obstructing them. Buckle up. All will be revealed," he says, but each area of the city has a signal or several signals, and says, "Let's start with a screen recording of all members of the South Side group to start." But wait, there's more. And so you see, the Minnesota anti-ICE signal group leader who's been coordinating ICE riots was identified as Amanda Kohler. She's a paid protest organizer and Minnesota State Senate candidate too. And would you look at that? She was a campaign strategist for Tim Walz. Wall Street Ape says, don't stop making her famous until she's arrested. She will just only be the start, and it begins, ladies and gentlemen. Codename HAH or Ha. But meet Amanda Noel Kohler, one of the admins of the Minnesota Ice Watch signal chat group. And she believes that property damage isn't violence, was a campaign strategist for Tim Walz, and organizes a lot of the protests and walkouts in the area. And so you see, ladies and gentlemen, Democrats, Governor Tim Walz, Mayor Jacob Frey, Congressperson Ilhan Omar, Minnesota and Minneapolis rioters threatens Trump and America First, patriots, lawful and constitutional immigration enforcement, and this happened. You all take care. Be well, and please come on back for my next show. Thank you for hitting that like button and subscribing. Be safe out there, and God bless.